Welcome to SafeBox Info. Today, we're unpacking a deeply concerning incident that recently unfolded in Bangladesh. On August 14th, 2026, what was supposed to be a routine dismantling job at the Ferdous Steel shipbreaking yard in Sitakunda turned into an absolute nightmare. We're going to walk through exactly what happened, the severe safety violations that led up to it, and the much broader environmental catastrophe surrounding this entire industry. Okay, let's dive into this.
Let's start with the immediate human cost here. 9 people lost their lives in this single devastating event. And these weren't just the workers on the clock either. The victims tragically included local residents who bravely tried to step in and rescue the laborers trapped inside. The culprit? Well, it was a sudden exposure to a highly toxic gas.
Now, you might be wondering what exactly caused this. The specific hazard was an old decommissioned liquefied natural gas, or LNG carrier. Crucially, this ship was not cleared of toxic gas beforehand. Literally, as soon as they began cutting into the vessel, a massive leak occurred, leading to a huge concentration of carbon monoxide. The workers suffered severe breathing difficulties from a sudden lack of oxygen, and several just fell unconscious right there on the job. There were absolutely no prior gas-free tests and no risk assessments conducted before they began tearing the hull apart. Section 1. A history of fatalities and the staggering human cost of shipbreaking.
Look, this tragedy, as horrifying as it is, didn't just happen in a vacuum. When we zoom out from this immediate incident, we find a grim, persistent pattern of hazardous working conditions that have plagued the shipbreaking yards of Bangladesh for decades. The data here is truly chilling. According to the Bangladesh Institute of Labor Studies, between 2015 and 2024 alone, at least 137 workers were killed and 205 were injured in accidents across the Sitakunda shipbreaking yards. In 2019 alone, which was the deadliest year on record for that decade, 23 workers lost their lives. And if you look back at earlier estimates, roughly 400 workers were killed in the 2 decades preceding that. So the crucial takeaway here is that this is an industry where poisonous fumes, explosions, and confined spaces have been claiming lives continuously.
And the danger? It's not receding at all. Actually, it's rapidly escalating. Comparing workplace accidents in just the first 6 months of the year makes this shockingly clear. In the first half of 2025, there were 15 accidents recorded. But in the first half of 2026, that number rocketed to 28. That is a massive 87% spike in accidents in a very short time frame. 3 workers were killed and 25 injured during just those 6 months, leading right up to the August disaster. The risks are clearly intensifying. So what's actually driving these fatalities? Well, gas and fire incidents, combined with falling heavy objects, make up nearly 80% of all accidents. Workers are repeatedly entering tanks and confined spaces without adequate protective equipment, proper training, or any sort of permit-to-work systems. In fact, investigations have shown that some workers even reported resorting to wrapping their own shirts around their mouths to try and filter out the toxic fumes. It is a fundamental failure of basic occupational safety.
Section 2. Ignored warnings and violations. A timeline of negligence.
You know what makes the August tragedy at Ferdous Steel so incredibly frustrating? It was entirely preventable. Government inspectors actually knew this yard was operating unsafely. There's this incredible contradiction at the heart of the tragedy. Believe it or not, Ferdous Steel actually received a green shipyard certification in 2026. But contrast that official eco-friendly stamp of approval against the grim reality on the ground. Earlier in the year, government inspectors found no risk assessments for hazardous work, entirely inadequate safety equipment, and even illegal operations happening on weekends when the yard was supposed to be closed. It really goes to show that a shiny certification on paper doesn't always translate to safety in practice.
Let's walk through this timeline, because the yard's management actually had months of explicit warnings. The Department of Inspection for Factories and Establishments, or DIF, wasn't silent. They issued a formal safety notice on February 2nd after spotting these violations. On May 4th, they came back, saw nothing had been fixed, and issued a reminder. On June 8th, they sent a final notice. By July 15th, they had actually filed a lawsuit against the yard's owners in a labor court over these ignored directives. And then, exactly 1 month later, on August 14th, the gas tragedy struck. The writing was literally on the wall for months.
Section 3. The environmental crime, e-waste and toxic dumping. Okay, let's zoom out a bit from the immediate occupational hazards to the macro level. The shipbreaking industry doesn't just threaten the people cutting the steel, it threatens the entire surrounding ecosystem. Researchers and international environmental organizations are now describing what's happening on the Sitakunda coast as a full-blown international environmental crime. Under the guise of scrapping ships, tons of highly toxic electronic waste and banned chemicals are essentially being dumped right into Bangladesh from developed nations. Hidden inside these decommissioned vessels are some deadly substances: lead, mercury, asbestos, and even radioactive materials. We aren't just talking about trace elements here. These are massive quantities of hazardous waste being introduced into a highly vulnerable environment without proper treatment. And where exactly does all this toxic waste end up? It's being discharged straight into the Bay of Bengal and the coastal soils. The impact on the local marine ecosystem is nothing short of catastrophic. According to environmental investigations, aquatic life like crabs, oysters, and marine fish are quite literally losing their reproductive capacity due to the heavy chemical overload. The entire ecosystem is essentially being poisoned from the bottom up. Section 4. Poisoned coastal waters and the scientific evidence. But hey, we don't just have to take the word of activists for this. There is hard scientific evidence. A recent peer-reviewed study published in PubMed objectively proves the contamination. Researchers measured heavy metals directly in the yard's water, and the numbers are staggering. Lead was found at levels between 55 and 107 milligrams per liter. Mercury and cadmium were also heavily present. In every single one of these cases, the measured levels severely exceeded the acceptable standards set by Bangladesh's Department of Environment. Statistical analysis confirmed that this deviation is highly significant, meaning there is a very clear link to the shipbreaking activities. On top of the heavy metals, the study also found extreme turbidity. That's basically a measure of how cloudy or opaque the water is, and it was hitting levels up to an incredible 640 JTU, alongside heavily altered pH levels. The big takeaway here? Shipbreaking activities are indiscriminately destroying the water properties. The surrounding environment isn't just being superficially polluted, it is being fundamentally altered on a chemical level. So how do we actually reform this industry? Well, the answer lies in enforcing true green yard policies. And no, this doesn't just mean a fancy label to slap on a corporate brochure. A genuine green yard policy means mandatory protocols prioritizing strict worker safety, the proactive identification and removal of flammable or toxic hazards before a single cut is made, and a rock-solid commitment to zero toxic environmental discharge. It requires regular government monitoring, advanced scanners to check for hazardous waste before ships even enter the yard, and most importantly, real accountability when the rules are broken. Which really leaves us with one critical question to ponder moving forward. Will the shipbreaking industry finally adhere to genuine green yard policies and put human life and ecology above unchecked profit? Or will Sitakunda's coast become a dead sea, forever contaminated by the hazardous waste of the developed world? The loss of 9 lives in August was an absolute tragedy, but it was also a glaring warning. It's up to regulators, the industry, and the international community to decide if that warning will finally result in action. Thank you for joining me for this explainer. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.